This little movie is available for free for everybody for awareness raising purposes. So if you want to use it in one of your meetings, if you think it's useful for awareness raising, go to the ELD website, load it down and use it. Again, very warm welcome to this meeting, the future of our ecosystems. We are not talking about soils today, we are talking about ecosystems. And we would like to talk about the costs and benefits of sustainable land management. My name is Alexander Müller. I'm the managing director of a small German think tank, TMG, Think Tank for Sustainability. And in order to be really transparent, I was also the study leader of an initiative, the Economics of Ecosystems and Biodiversity for Food and Agriculture, Teeb, where Monica Lopez today is presenting the results of the report we have just launched today. So I'm biased. I'm biased in a threefold way. First, I'm convinced that we have to put serious economic considerations on the agenda. I'm biased in a second way, that we should not think that putting a price tag on everything is a solution. So the initiative we are presenting today does not mean to monetize natural capital or human capital. We would like to know the value. We would like to analyze it, and we would like to know what are the costs. And third, we have to discuss the economic environment our initiative is launched in. You might have participated in the opening ceremony of the Global Landscape Forum yesterday. And I have to say, personally, I was surprised because it was full of very big figures, billions and trillions and costs and benefits. And it seems that economic considerations are now everywhere. I'm not so quite sure that we have come to the end of our work. It is very good to make sure and to display how expensive land degradation is, as this movie has done. There are costs. But to translate the knowledge on the costs into action is a bigger step forward. And the session we are having today is looking at costs and benefits of our ecosystems in order to raise awareness, to inform, and also to provide information on the distorted economic environment in which restoration of landscape has to take place. I would like to come back to some of the figures the movie already has mentioned. 24% of the world's productive lands are degraded, 24%. There's an estimate that between 1.5 and 3.5 billion people are already affected. 24 billion tons of fertile topsoil are lost by erosion every year, 24 billion tons. This means 3.4 tons per person. 1, 2, 3, together it's around 12 tons fertile topsoil lost every year. And the cost, as mentioned there, is $70 per person and year, global population 490 billion. Why are we doing it? The answer is very easy. These costs don't show up in our economic calculation. They are invisible. They don't show up in our food bill. If food is produced while degrading land, it can be produced very cheaply, and the damage done to the environment or the damage done to social structures is not visible. And all what we are talking about is making invisible externalities visible. That's the problem with environmental costs. They don't show up on the bill when you go to a supermarket, but the future generations will have to pay for it. So what we are trying to do is to inform about the real costs. We will inform about what will be the benefits if you invest. And we have to tackle that serious challenge that the way we are doing economic calculation is completely ignoring it. And isn't this silly? We are living on a world with scarce resources, and natural resources don't have a value. I would like to use another example. We all know it that 1/3 of all food produced is wasted. That's up to 1.3 billion tons every year. 1.3 billion tons every year. How can we afford to waste 1/3 of all food? Because it just has no value. And therefore, I'm convinced that one of the serious challenges ahead of us is to change the economic environment. Just being informed about the costs of damage is a first step, but this does not solve it. And I would like to come back to a very famous report. Sir Nicholas Stern launched it some years ago about the costs of inaction. He was launching a report on how costly is it not to act on climate change. If you don't invest today, you have to pay twice or threefold in the future. And this is again one of the challenges, the timeline. Investing today in fighting against climate change will benefit future generations. If we don't invest, future generations will have to pay 2 or 3 times. And this is a core problem of our current economic system. And therefore, I'm really happy that we are here to discuss costs and benefits of sustainable management. But we have to go beyond calculation of the damage done by unsustainable agriculture. We have to look at what is the economic environment, what are the economic conditions, so that we can really internalize these costs and that farmers with sustainable practices can benefit from it. It's a real big challenge, but I'm convinced we have to do this step. Otherwise, we can meet in 10 years' time again and we can present the same figures or even higher figures with damage done, but we don't talk about solutions. And I'm really happy that the economics of land degradation has started to look at the costs and the benefits. And we have to create a global community to talk about what does this mean for pricing, what does this mean for taking into account natural capital, and how can we start to change and to tackle economic environment which is highly distorted. Not a small task, but we are starting it on a Thursday morning at 9 o'clock or 9:20 with a group of people who stood up early to come here and to join us in the discussion. So it is worthwhile tackling this big challenge, because all what the Global Landscape Forum wants to achieve, and we want to support it, is linked in various ways to the economic environment. And if we don't look at the economic environment, it will be very, very difficult to tackle the challenges. And what worries me most is that the poorest and the most vulnerable people will suffer the first and the most. People with a lot of money can afford it. If you don't have money, you cannot afford it. And therefore, looking at economics, I repeat myself, does not mean to put a price tag on nature. It's protecting what is the most valuable asset of poor people. Some people said natural capital is the asset of poor people. And therefore, we are talking today about costs and benefits, and I'm really happy, and I would like to lead you through this agenda that Marc from the Economics of Land Degradation Initiative will present some case studies and policy impact. And then my friend and colleague Monica Lopez is presenting our Teeb agri-food approach. We are still missing Ann Oyango from the Ministry for Agriculture, Livestock and Fisheries. Maybe she will join us later, and she wanted to present ecosystem valuation in Kenya, achievements and further needs in the context of Kenya's Vision 2030. And she has a lot to present. I know her quite well. And then Kattiline Solimosi from UNIQUE is presenting the economics of forest landscape restoration. I will try to interrupt the presenters after 10 minutes, independent if you are at the end of your presentation or not, because I would like to hand it over to you in order to raise after each presentation 1 or 2 questions, so that we don't have a presentation and in the end we only have 3 minutes for interaction. And I will also interrupt you later on, because we need in the end 10-15 minutes for a discussion. The challenge is huge. ELD has made a big step forward. We should use this as a starting point, and we should discuss today how to really assess costs and benefits of sustainable management in order to ensure that our ecosystems really have a future. So Marc, you are the first presenter. The floor is yours. It's now 9:26. 10 minutes means at 9:36 it's over. Time is running.
I'll talk very fast then. Yeah. Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Alex, for the
beautiful introduction into our session here and for the nice introduction of the ELD initiative as well. I'll jump right into it. Thank you all for joining us this morning. Thank you for joining us in a session on economics, which is sometimes disputed as well. We had a discussion, Alexander and I, yesterday about how an economic approach is received by our partners there. It's often criticized because, but we think that this is because, Alex has pointed this out, that there is an understanding that we want to put a price on ecosystem services, on the outputs of our ecosystem which are used by our human society. However, this is not what we want to do. We want to show the value of our ecosystems and include this then in decision making there. Alex has brought forward a huge vision there, with economics being a facilitator basically for a major systems change in the context of food production, land management there. I'm always in favor of thinking big, so I'd be very happy if our little initiative could contribute to this discussion and to this process there. And I'd like to use the opportunity to introduce you quickly into ELD, what we're doing and how we are trying to include economic information into decision-making processes there. You've seen already this little movie with our little green ELD man there, which gave a short introduction. I'll go a little bit more into depth in the last 8 remaining minutes or so. Yeah. That's it. ELD was set up in 2012. And with the support of the German Federal Ministry for Economic Development and Cooperation, the European Commission, and instrumentally set up by the UN Convention to Combat Desertification. They were looking for some similar arguments as they were produced by the Stern report. Alexander had mentioned it before in the context of climate change already. So, and we were set up to arrange or to create information on the cost of land degradation. But looking at it, you think that the cost of land degradation is not sufficient for information on the cost of land degradation is not sufficient for a better decision making. You want to show options, you want to show and you want to convince decision makers that it's worth investing funds, budget, money, resources into sustainable land management approaches, that it pays off to invest there. So our initiative was basically turned into an awareness raising project there. We create, with the help of an extended network of research partners, economic information and feed this into policy dialogues there. And we create little movies like the one you saw before to convince people, decision makers who've not been involved or who have not a background in economics, that this is worth a path following there. We set up this movie and others which are on our website or with YouTube because I wanted to have something which I could basically show to my mom at home when she asks me, what are you doing in the office? I'm saying, okay, this is what we're doing and this is what we're doing it for. So we're trying to bring down a very complex scientific information, very complex scientific reports to something which can be understood and utilized by decision makers then. So it's this science policy interface, which makes our job very interesting there. Let's see. As I said, we're not doing it on our own. This ELD Secretariat, the Secretariat of the initiative, is hosted by GIZ in Germany, funded by the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, the European Commission, and other partners as well. But the real work is being done by our partners. It's being done by research organizations all over the world, international and national. We're working with multilateral organizations to engage in the global dialogue and also on the national level with policy partners, policy institutions there. Not only with policy decision makers though, but we have a work stream where we feed or where we provide this information also to private sector decision makers who take a sustainable land management approach seriously. So here's a list of a couple of partners. Actually, being in Nairobi today is kind of a home game for us because we have many partners here. I see colleagues from eCraft being here, Stacey and Rocio from SEI just next door. We are working with UNDP here on the campus, and Monica and others have been a long contributing partner to the process already. So you see there's a number of our partners here which I do not want to forget to mention there. So we're working with political decision makers, with the scientific community, and with the private sector, as I've indicated. And what we do, we're working on the basis of a holistic framework there. The initial approach was a global approach, and we're breaking it now down to the national level. Alex said that we want to change the system. We want to change the system with different approaches on different levels, working on UN level, but also facilitating national decision makers, for example, to allow reaching the national targets for the SDGs, for example. ELD specifically feeds into SDG 15.3 on land degradation neutrality, and on the natural capital one, that's 15.9. As I said, we try to sharpen the awareness for the issue, and we think that economics can be a good kind of language, a medium to link science with policy, to link different decision-making levels, and also link decision makers from different sectors. It is not always easy for, say, our partners from the green sector to reach out to the Ministry for Finance, Development, Economics, for example, economy, to allow for an increased, for example, investment in our course there. But economics can help with that. We work on with scenarios, providing a scenario on how would the world look like, how would your sphere of influence look like if you continue as you go now, and how we could change this through amended investments, for example. We break it down to different levels, and in the end, hopefully, create some solutions, policy papers. We provide an option for a way forward there. As Alex has indicated we think that economic arguments can be a strong driver for change there. For this, we include geophysical data, as well as consider the community livelihoods and the specific conditions of our specific studies in there. And then add cost-benefit analysis and include valuation techniques from your basic economic systems there. So it's not that we're using a new methodology or so, it's all out there. It just has to be streamlined. That's a bit shot out here, but we started with a global study, and bringing it down now to 4 different target groups there. When I say that we're bringing it down to different target groups, ELD is now in its implementation phase, what we're calling it, and we want to facilitate decision making on the national level with our work. At this stage, we are planning to work or operating already in 16 countries all over the world. There is a strong focus on Africa, though. And it's not that there is like an international expert parachuting in, collecting some data, and then running off again. We are working always in close partnership with national institutions on this, research and policy institutions, to create something suitable for the specific context there, and also to strengthen the ability to create and also to include economic information in decision-making processes there. So it's a strong capacity development focus, or a strong capacity development facet to it as well. Benefiting overall a sustainable land management approach, if you want. We create on the basis, as a basis, we create a sound, or we try to create a sound scientific basis, create a study on that in close cooperation with local partners there. We link this to the national targets on land degradation neutrality, for example, of setting up natural capital accounts, things like this, the green economy. It's a wide range where our expertise can contribute to, and we feed this into a policy dialogue. The capacity development aspect is built on trainings which we provide, curricula development, the development of expertise with our local partners there. So this is our little contribution to the huge system change Alex has been asking for. And we think with the expertise which is collected under the ELD banner, under the ELD umbrella, we are quite nicely set up to contribute to that. And with that, I'd like to say asante. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Marc. And exactly 10 minutes. Congratulations.
Yeah.
So now there's an opportunity for 2 or 3 brief comments or brief questions. If there is a need, was very clear, but does anybody want to take the floor to challenge him or to tell him why he is wrong or what he has to do more?
Challenge me right away, and that's all right.
Thank you. It's not to challenge you, but just to have more information about the very last step.
I'm sorry, I was a bit. I'm super happy to elaborate on this. We are a bit short on time. We conduct trainings with the help of international experts, with 4 local researchers, PhD, even down to student level or so there. And with these teams, we conduct also studies with just like a hands-on training on the ground there in a specific region or in a specific context there in countries there. We break it down. This is maybe the GIZ-specific approach of building capacities in the countries there. And always with the help of our international network, but I'm happy to elaborate more in detail.
Another, and please introduce yourself briefly.
Okay. Hello, my name is Huri. I work in the UN environment here. I'm an intern. I'm just curious about your influential power, because you told about like you feed policy dialogues in countries, and maybe you can give us an example.
Yeah, we feed, there's a number of impacts I could give. So ELD has been contributing to UNCCD decisions, for example. We have, we contributed to legal framework setups in Georgia, in Mali. We created, or we were, I don't want to say instrumental, but ELD contributed to the setup of a 200,000 hectare area of sustainable land management in Jordan there. So it's different approaches there. Sustainable management of forests in Mali, for example, more sustainable management, hopefully, of rangelands in Botswana. It's different approaches. More.
One more question, please.
Yeah, as you know, environmentalists has their own language. Economists has their own language. In some words, how to bridge it?
This is maybe one of the biggest challenges and the most interesting parts of our work there, that we bring together these different silos, these different communities, right? And we try to create a language there in the end, which is understandable for everyone there. So usually, one extra sentence, Alex. While the researcher asks us for more funds and we need to go more into detail, the politician wants us to break it down to one headline or one number, right? How do we level this out there? And it's the same with environmentalists or the green sector and the economists there. So we need to, it's a fine balance there in the end to create a balanced output. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, and there will be an opportunity to come back to all these important questions in the last round of discussion. So now we want to move from the economics of land degradation, quite complex, to an issue which is much more complex. It's called Teeb agri-food, the economics of ecosystems and biodiversity for food and agriculture, trying to lay scientific foundations for a comprehensive analysis of what we have called the eco-agri-food system. Sounds complex, and I promise you it is. But it is not complex because scientists thought we have to make it very complex and nobody should understand it. I'm personally convinced that agriculture and food systems are one of the most complex systems on Earth. People talk a lot about energy change and the move from fossil fuels to renewables. This is easy compared to changing food systems, because we have many different food systems in the world. It's a global business, and we tried in Teeb Agri-Food to identify what is a food system. And before I'm giving the floor to Monica, and she will present the findings of Teeb Agri-Food, I would like to briefly present what is our understanding of a food system, including natural capital and including human health. So we have, first element, very diverse agricultural production systems. There's a broad typology of production systems. What is very, very important, these production systems employ more people than any other sector in the world. It's 1.5 billion people globally being involved in agriculture. Do you have an idea how many people are working in the automobile industry globally? Who can guess it? And don't go too high. It's around up to 50 million people. 50 million people in the global automobile industry and 1.5 billion people in agriculture. So it's economically and as a workforce the biggest sector in the world, far the biggest sector. But this agricultural production is underpinned by complex biological and climatic feedback loops at local, regional and global level. So first you have a typology of many, many people working in agriculture, different production systems, and then you have the biological and climatic feedback systems. And these systems are overlaid by social and economic systems, which transform agricultural production to food. So the whole economy and the whole social issues come in. And then you have a huge system of market infrastructure, policies and corporate strategies to deliver the food to the people. And this is interacting with the consumers, and they have their preferences. Eating meat, not eating meat, cultural preferences. And you have a lot of technologies, info, and let's not forget cultural preferences in it. This is the eco-agri-food system, and we are talking in the SDGs, we want to transform it towards sustainability. It's not an easy task. And the way we have chosen to tackle it, and Monica, be ready for your 10 minutes, is we want to look at the hidden flows, at the positive and negative externalities. The price we are paying for food in the supermarkets does not tell the truth. Very often we pay 3 times. First in the supermarket, second for landscape restoration, because agriculture is one of the biggest driver of degradation. So all the big figures presented by Marc are somehow linked to agricultural practices, to unsustainable practices. And in the end, societies are paying also for human health. WHO has commissioned a study, the costs of diabetes type 2. Every year, $850 billion. Very much related to unsustainable consumption practices. So tackling this system is something we wanted to start with Teeb Agri-Food, and we are far away from presenting these concrete results ELD could do. We have just put on the table a scientific study looking at the foundations of these systems. 150 people from more than 30 countries have worked for 3 years, and Monica is going to present it in 10 minutes. Good luck, Monica.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Thanks for the organizing of this very good event, and thanks for inviting us. So can we go on to the next slide, or is it me? Okay. Okay. So thanks also, Alex, for taking up a bit of my presentation, because now I have more time to explain the other things, and I won't be rushed. So I will go into the Teeb Agri-Food results, but I would also like to start a little bit further back with what the economics of ecosystems and biodiversity approach is. if that's okay. I know we are very much focused on agriculture and food here, but I feel it has a good approach to bring it all together. So this presentation, I would try to give that Teeb background, Teeb for agriculture and food, the eco-agri-food systems, which Alex has already explained, focusing on the externalities on the value chain, and then the evaluation framework, which is one of those lenses that we are trying to put forward to measure these impacts and measure the analysis. And then how we are trying to bring this in the ground with the implementation. So we are far from it. We don't have results yet, as he mentioned, but I think there's a good way forward to bring this valuation framework on the ground at the country level. So the economics of ecosystems and biodiversity, as most of the panelists here know, and I think you were also involved, started in 2008, and the publications were targeted. They were focused to different target audiences, like the ecological and economic foundations, national and regional policy planning, but also Teeb for business. And these have been out, and some years later, some implementation work started with doing policy assessment in countries. But then for the past 3 years, the economics of ecosystems and biodiversity has been focusing on food and agricultural systems. And the main reason for that is that those sectors that have the biggest impacts are actually those that are linked to food production, food system, whether it's fisheries or livestock or farming. So we thought it was, they thought it was interesting to focus on those and see how, if we are going to target the SDGs, whether it's employment, health, poverty, equality, given that most of the small-scale farming are also done by women, this should be the sector that should be addressed. So that's when these two big reports came, the Teeb for Agriculture and Food, Scientific and Economic Foundations, and a synthesis report. So both of these are on the website, and I recommend that you look at them if you like, particularly the synthesis one, which is already finished, and I have a couple of copies here, and you can also feel free to address me and I can get some more. And so this is what I wanted to mention about the eco-agri-food system complex. So what this report aims to do is to provide a comprehensive economic valuation of the whole system along the whole value chain. So we call it from farm to fork. We don't focus only what happens within the farm gate, because a lot of the inputs do come from outside. And it also wants to demonstrate that the economic environment in which the farmers operate nowadays actually has a lot of externalities that are not visible, and that we don't keep into account when we do our cost-benefit analysis or when we do our accounting, and what goes into the macro GDP numbers either. So both negative and positive externalities. And this is a bit of a summary of how the eco-agri-food system complex impacts and dependencies. So it brings the human health and the skills, the society, economy, and environment. And we have named those as the 4 capitals. And in the valuation framework, I will go a little bit more into depth in those. So I will just go very quickly of the visible and invisible flows of agricultural production. As we see, agriculture and food systems depend on biodiversity ecosystems and on human systems. So there are flows and inputs from both of those towards the agriculture and food system, but also from agriculture and food system towards the others. So I think the first ones are the ones that we tend to keep in mind and we tend to bring into our accounts, which are so irrigation. Can you see it properly? I can see it really well here, but I think the projection is not that good. So for example, well, very good. I can see it sort of very good. Pesticides and all the things that you would bring into your accounts and into your decision making. And those are the things that the human systems bring into the agriculture and food. But then there are other things that the agriculture and food get back to the human systems, and those are also visible. I think I might get my microphone, just a second. Thank you. Thanks. Can you hear me? So for example, and I'll get this also. What do the agriculture and food systems bring back to the human systems? Employment, food, nutrition, even fuels, as we saw in the video, and agrotourism. And all those are things that we do keep in mind, that we take into account. However, there are some invisible positive flows. So agriculture does bring invisible positive flows into the humans, like the cultural heritage and access to recreation. But mainly it's the biodiversity and ecosystems that support the agriculture and food systems with what we call ecosystem services. So for example, climate regulation, erosion control, pollination, all those things that sometimes we take for granted, but we should start putting into our account and finding a lens and finding a metric way of actually considering them. And then of course there are some flows that also go from the agriculture and food system towards biodiversity and ecosystem. And if those negative ones are increasing, as they seem to be doing because the amount of land that's degraded is increasing, then the positive flows will also decrease. So for example, there's soil erosion, habitat erosion, species reduction, and the impact that that has on the climate. So what Teeb tries to do is to recognize these values by awareness raising, by capacity development, but also going into the country and discussing what these are specifically, capturing those values, doing economic valuation, and then demonstrating them. So also using biophysical modeling and scenario analysis with the business as usual and the policy action scenario, trying to understand what our land management decisions will be and what the future scenarios would look like if we consider or if we don't consider these invisible flows. So the Teeb valuation framework, so the main reason why we decided to bring it forward and put it together, just a second, how much time do I have, Alex? 5. Thank you. So we need to standardize the measurement of the system, and many other systems have decided to standardize. So why do we have one framework for ecosystem services? Why do we have one framework for measuring finance? I think it's important that we're all talking about the same units. However, what's been used to measure agriculture, which is yield per hectare, productivity, doesn't capture all these things. So we thought it was important to make sure that all these things come together and that we're able to compare across the alternative system and across policy scenarios. And this is the evaluation framework. Since it's not very, since maybe you don't see it very well, but I do invite you to go into the website and see the publications. I think the best way to get our head around this would be to look at kind of as a matrix. So if we look along the y-axis, we start from the stocks, what stocks give to the flows, and the outcomes. And then this is when we talk about the 4 capital. So natural capital, produced capital, human capital, and social capital. It's important that all those things that are feeding into the agri-food value chain, but also receiving from the agri-food value chain, are able to be accounted for. So the important thing of this valuation framework, and I'll come back here, thank you, is that it's universal from the point of view that we could use it for any food system. So whether it's here in Africa or it's in another place, and what kind of, whether it's livestock or fishery, different geographical areas. It's also comprehensive. Like I mentioned, we try to do from farm to fork. So there are inputs that come into our farm that are beyond the farm gate. So freshwater, pollination, climate regulation. This evaluation framework will consider all of those. We'll try to keep them into account. And then also, it's also inclusive from the point of view that we don't consider only those assets that have a monetary valuation. So we understand that there are many assets and flows that don't have substitute. And so it's important also that those are considered when we're measuring this. I understand that the economics of ecosystems and biodiversity sometimes encounters issues with the commodification of nature, so we're also trying to address those with this valuation framework. And so I think I'd also like to mention how we are going to bring this valuation framework and how we are implementing Teeb, those 3 items that I mentioned earlier about recognizing those invisible flows, capturing those values, and demonstrating them. So currently we have some ongoing projects. Some of them are in Africa, others are in other countries, but the one that we are currently implementing in Kenya, Tanzania, Colombia, and Thailand is supporting biodiversity and climate-friendly land management in agricultural landscapes. So what we've started doing is having a policy assessment, a policy dialogue as to what are the priorities currently. And one thing I'd like to mention, which for us is already a small impact, but it's a step towards, we've had the agriculture team, and I wish our agriculture person was here already, and the environment team, together with planning and water, discussing this team and discussing what their priority would be. What do they want to use this framework approach for? And like 2 months later, from the cross-cutting climate change unit in agriculture, this person was actually talking how to do the agricultural strategy transformation sector, the agricultural sector transformation strategy. And she was actually saying that they need to bring this valuation framework into the table in order to do their agricultural sector work. So for us, that was already, I mean, we had been able to convey the message, and actually people were taking it on board, hopefully for decision making. So that was a small progress I found. And then we're also, thanks. Very soon, in January, we hope to be starting a new project in 7 countries, promoting biodiversity and sustainability in the agriculture and food sector through economic valuation. And that will, this project in particular will bring a strong component with the business and private sector. They will be brought into the table and also hear from them what enabling conditions do they need in order to implement this and to make sure that their impacts are taken into account. And then one third project, which is not directly related to Teeb, agriculture and food, but I thought it'd be interesting because it brings a natural capital accounting component. So the Teeb approach is used to develop the experimental ecosystem accounts methodology. So it's part of the system of environmental economic accounting, and some countries are deciding to pilot that experimental ecosystem accounts. And the way that Teeb has recognized, captures, demonstrated values, and the way that Teeb has done the scenario and the modeling helps to feed into the values of these experimental ecosystem accounts. And I think that's it. So thank you very much, and feel free to see the website.
So now again, up to you. Comments, questions? Who wants to start? The microphone is coming from behind.
Hi, thank you. I am Alejandra Orozco. I'm here on behalf of Equitable Earth Initiative. My question is related to those projects you mentioned in the last slide. These are done with government agencies and UNEP. Is that how it is being implemented? What approach are you using to undertake this?
Okay. Yeah. Thanks. Can I go ahead, or should we wait for more questions? So what we usually do is we link with a government, with a strong national partner, whether it's a government or a research institution. So in the case of Kenya, for example, the CBD technical focal point is the National Museums of Kenya. And they're the ones that are helping us have our kind of feelers and implementation on the ground. And they are able to communicate with all ministers, and they're able to communicate with civil society and business partners. Yeah, I think in the case of Kenya, because we are based here, but still, nevertheless, we need that link on the ground. In Tanzania, it's the Vice President's office, because they're the ones that host environment. In Colombia, it's the Humboldt Institute. Maybe you've heard of them. So they're, in terms of IPBS, they're very strong, and they're policy and science interface partners.
Rocio Diaz from the Stockholm Environment Institute here at the Africa Center. I was the social task leader for the ISO standard on bioenergy. And within, we tried to introduce TEB, and it somehow related to what you just explained in agriculture and food. It was some time ago. But there was a lot of resistance from the private sector to adopt any kind of economic view in terms of ecosystem services. So I just wonder, how are you expecting this to be changed? Not to work just with the governments, maybe linked to the previous questions, but with the private sector that is engaged also in this type of activities.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for that. And Alex, I know you're dying to intervene.
No.
No, but I think you have more experience with what's been done so far. with the private sector?
I have two answers. The first is one of the big multinational food companies did an internal analysis of their impact on natural capital. And the figures I have seen is that their impact on natural capital is on an annual basis more than 200% of their revenue. And the CEO said, if the public knows this figure, and I quote, they are going to crucify us. That's, by the way, one of the reasons we have to do it, because we know that the production of food is heavily relying on natural capital. We know that natural capital is scarce, that we are running out of land, economics of land degradation, that we are in some areas of the world, we have water scarcity, and we are still allowing business to withdraw natural resources without accounting for it. And therefore, it's very, very important for awareness raising and also for a very difficult debate on what is the real price of our food. My second answer is there are businesses who are very open to it because they have a long-term interest in running their business. How can you have a long-term interest when you know that you are destroying the basis of your business? And therefore, there are more and more businesses being seriously interested in it, sometimes only in parts of the analysis, but this doesn't matter because they realized we are undermining the basis of our business if we don't take into account the value of natural capital. But now let's be careful. This does not automatically mean increasing prices. This would be completely wrong if we would say food has to be a lot more expensive. We have to first understand the system. We have to understand that we already pay twice or three times for cheap food so that we can set up an economic system which allows farmers, producers, retailers to move towards sustainability. So there is some support, but I'm quite convinced that there will be a lot of resistance. Let's overcome the resistance. There was one more question. The microphone is coming.
Can I, meanwhile, just comment on
Yes,
the private
please.
sector?
Yeah.
So a private company based here in Kenya, which is international, but here in Kenya they have tea plantations in an area that they know is a water catchment area. They have reached out to us when they realized that this was taking place, not only for the social responsibility point of view, but also from the sustainability in the long term for their plantation. So I think the discussion is being reciprocal a little bit more.
Yes, but links to this and the previous question, I'm coming back in my country, for example, for cocoa and vanilla. Can you imagine, for example, when you are buying some chocolates in European countries, how much is coming back to the small producers? It is less than 10% and most of the time less than 5%. Vanilla, I guess that you have taken a lot of vanilla ice during the summer, but it is less than 5% coming back to the small producers. So how can we come back to the reality through this marvelous information and the knowledge?
Okay, I'll just give a quick overview. So before we started with Teeb Agri-Food, we would also address countries and say, what's your policy priority? What would you like to address the Teeb approach for? And in Ecuador, they specifically said cocoa. And so we worked on the value chains, and the main recommendation for using the scenario analysis was let's give more value to the product. And so that was one of the recommendations to hopefully reduce the impact on the land, and so give a little bit more to the producer. I know that's not the last solution, but at least there was a small-scale pilot in one of the organically grown cocoa areas.
I would like to add another piece of answer. I think it was 2 years ago at one of the meetings at Agra, where I read in the newspaper a very nice article by the Minister of Health from Kenya, where he said, our health system will not be able to finance all the obesity and diabetes related costs. So we have to think broader. We have to include the question of, is cheaply produced sugar responsible for increase of obesity? And how do we link the costs for health to the cost of the production. And that's the reason why, and Monica, you have really done a great job. We were looking at the eco-agri-food system. If you look only at the silo, only at production or only at health costs, you will fail. You have to look at the complex interlinkages. And that's the challenge for setting up new value chains that benefit small-scale farmers and don't, at the other end, produce very high health costs. Because in the end, I repeat myself, the most vulnerable and the poorest people will suffer the most. There was one more question, then we are going to forests.
Okay, thank you. Yes, measuring matters in agriculture and food system is very crucial. But once we have a better understanding of the result of systems and the mechanism, how do you accompany a decision maker for finding a key strategy, a suitable strategy? Because that is also another step after knowing what does matter. So how to tackle with this? Thank you.
Thanks for that. Just a quick one. So I think the first thing is finding the right entry point. So like I mentioned in Kenya, we've come at a time when they're actually revising their agricultural strategy. And so this has been crucial because whenever we did the policy assessment in the beginning, most of the arrows pointed towards that. That one is being reviewed. There is the big four. We want to make sure that if we do something and we provide credible data, it will be at a time where it's actually going to be uptaken. And also the scenario analysis are usually very compelling when you have the evidence. Of course, I think we all know that if we continue business as usual, it would be unsustainable. So what we need to do is also bring to the table all the other sectors that are going to help that happen. So for the fact that the agricultural coordinator of the revision of this agricultural sector was actually taken on board by Teeb and explaining to the other sectors, explaining to planning and to finance and to environment even, that this is the approach that we should take and that please let's take into account the results when we do our strategy. I think that's, I mean, it's only the enabling conditions and maybe some of the building blocks for it. I know a lot of political incidents needs to come in the way, and it doesn't always help, but at least that's the basis that we can provide. Thanks.
Thanks a lot,
Yeah.
Monica.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, and thanks to you for this start of the debate. We had planned now that Anne Onyango from the Ministry for Agriculture, Livestock and Fisheries from Kenya would like to present concrete examples of ecosystem valuation in Kenya, because Kenya has a lot to present, and she wanted to talk about achievements and further needs in the context of Kenya's Vision 2030. And this goes back a little bit to the last question, how to convince policymakers that what we are discussing in a very theoretical way is really useful for their policies and for their planning. Unfortunately, I cannot see Anne here, and I know she has a lot to offer because we had interacted and we were sitting on panels, I think twice in the last 2 years. So now we are moving, instead of presenting ecosystem valuation in Kenya, to the economics of forest landscape restoration. And you can see we started with land. We presented the complex situation of Teeb agri-food, and now we are trying to include the economics of forest landscapes restoration. The presentation will be made by Kattiline Solimosi from an NGO with a very nice name, Unique. Maybe you are going to explain us first what really makes you unique, and then you're going to present for 10 to 12 minutes the economics of forest landscape restoration. Kattiline, please join us here.
Thank you very much. Just let me show my first slide so you can see who I am and who Unique is. So we are not an NGO, we are a consulting company, and my name is Kattiline Solimosi, and I was supposed to present you a study, yet another study that we did together with GIZ on the economics of forest landscape restoration. But I changed my mind. I'm not going to present the study because you have heard about very interesting, very high-level studies that are framing this economic discussion. And instead of presenting you another study, I want to give you a concrete example from Kenya. Because apart from speaking at conferences, another part of my work, what I do for unique forestry and land use, is we are trying to identify very concrete business cases, meaning concrete producers, farmers, cooperatives, small companies or medium-sized companies that are doing forest landscape restoration, or you can just call it sustainable agriculture, or fighting land degradation. We are trying to find concrete examples and identify what they need and match them with investors that are looking for these type of investments. So on this parallel mission that I'm doing, I visited a company yesterday here in Kenya, about 2 hours drive north of Nairobi, in the rice growing region of Kenya. And I think many of you are based in Kenya, right? Or live in Kenya. Who is based in Kenya? Okay, great. That's good, because then you will understand better my example. So this is an organic fertilizer company. As you all know, fertilizer use in the smallholder farming sector is very low. I mean, a few smallholder farmers, they do their own compost, but most of them don't, let's be honest. And when we look at bigger companies in any crop, whether it's rice or tea or coffee or livestock or whatever it is, if they use any fertilizer at all, it's going to be the mineral, standard fertilizer. The organic fertilizer market is very, very small in Kenya. It's like 3-4 companies even trying to do it. I visited one of them, and I visited some rice farmers, and I talked to them yesterday here in Kenya and asked them, okay, what are your challenges? Why are you buying this product? Because obviously I visited some that are kind of already convinced and trying to change their practices. And I can give you concrete numbers, because actually that's why I like economics, because it becomes concrete, and we can all then think in numbers. We all take economic decisions every day, so everyone then has a comparison. So when I asked these small farmers what their current rice yield was per acre, they gave me figures between 20 and 24 bags of rice per season. And they said, okay, if you just do business as usual, meaning using no fertilizer or a little bit of mineral fertilizer, that's more or less our yield. If we, the ones who tried the organic product, on a 1 acre basis, they said they were able to increase their yield from 24 to about almost 30 bags. And so that's the benefit, right? That's the cost-benefit analysis. That's one of your monetizable benefits, which is yield. But there are other benefits as well that I can come to later. And the cost of one bag of a 50 kg bag that you have to apply on 1 acre is 3,200 Kenyan shillings. It's a little bit more expensive than your average mineral fertilizer, which is around 3,000 shillings, maybe, per 50 kg bag. So your expenditure is about 200 shillings more per acre. But your revenue is, you have a very high percentage increase. Even after one season, you increase from 24 to 30 bags. So I just wanted to give you this very concrete example of, we can call it the economics of land degradation even, or the economics of the agri-food ecosystem, or the economics of FLR. What we are trying to do really, and we also did it in this study, is bring these high-level economics down to a per hectare basis. And on the one hand, show how you can calculate it, so the methodology of which steps to follow to calculate these costs and benefits, but also give concrete examples. So the study is based on Ethiopia, on doing modeling in Ethiopia, but hearing this example in Kenya is, this is how I want to show you that you can also apply it, let's say, to rice farming in Kenya, and the business case for using organic fertilizer in smallholder farming here in Kenya. And there is a business case. And coming back more to the more theoretical economics, so costs and benefits, I will now apologize that I will jump many slides that I had prepared, but since I want to be more illustrative, I'm going to jump to one of my very last slides, so don't look now, while I'm going through, because I want to show you, sorry for this. I want to show you this slide. I'm sorry that you don't see it with high contrast. But what I want to show you is that if you're the farmer up there on the right, doing your farming,
and we are looking at it, a ton of carbon credits going for about €5 per ton. Can we call this the cost of financing the project? Can we call it the, can that be termed as the entire cost of that project? Because the benefit is much more to the farmer. But we are looking at these farmers who had these unsustainable methods, but they are now moving to sustainable methods. What other benefits can we say accrue from this kind of project? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for giving this great example of this great project, which you know that I also know very well, and we work with Livelihoods Ventures, and we work with you guys here in Kenya and other countries. This is a good example where big private sector companies are, using, they decided to do carbon offsets, and they decided to fund really cool projects with this money, that the certificates that they can sell on the market. I think the costs are much more if you think about all the years it took to set up these programs, all your work, you're as a great technical NGO being out there in the field and working with these farmers. You could calculate that all as costs, all hours of labor, agricultural extension, trainings, whatever it is. You could put that all on the cost side. And on the benefit side, obviously, as you said, the carbon certificates is one of these typical monetizable benefits that we usually talk about. But it's a small portion, probably, is for the farmer. It's a very, very tiny bonus that he gets in the end. The real benefit for the farmer is, yeah, as you know, it's the increased yield, it's the better soil quality, it's the better water retention, it's the even, if you widen it, the better social security that they have due to more, resilient crops and steady yields and so on. So great project. Go talk to him, please, about this project.
My name is Sarah from TMG Research, and I have a brief question. What is the input material for this organic fertilizer, and where is it sourced? And I have in mind that we don't create a gain, but also cause a loss where the materials are sourced. And would you be so kind to share the name of the organization that is manufacturing this organic fertilizer?
Yes. First of all, apologies that I didn't mention their name. They are called KOFAR, K-O-F-A-R. You know them. Okay. Yeah. Great company. Go invest in them.
This is not an advertisement meeting.
They are doing economics of land degradation in practice. It's a good question about the raw material source, because ideally, if you have a small to medium-sized farm, you keep the organic material on your farm and you reutilize it and so on and reapply it. But once you become a bigger farm size, you need to get it from somewhere else. So this company, to be concrete, they source it from municipal market. Municipal waste size from markets, from open markets, where there is a lot of vegetable waste and that type of stuff. That's where they source it from, but the source is a real barrier to find good sources and keep the quality even in Kenya.
Thank you. Thank you. My name is Dabiri, working for Kenya Forest Service here in Kenya, and we are doing a lot of work on the forest landscape restoration. We have committed ourselves to the Afri 100 challenge of the 5.1 million hectares. We have actually been able to map out where these areas are. Now, the challenge that we have, and this is what brought me to this meeting, is to find out whether there is any economic modeling that has been done for us to be able to futuristic understand with the 5.1 million hectares by 2030, what does this mean economically? Are there models that have been developed towards this? And the second part of it is we have also been involved very much through support of CIFO and USAID in terms of doing valuation, system valuation, especially for our 3 main water towers in this country, that is Mau and Cherangani and Mount Elgon. And again, this is work that I feel like we could also be able to share together with what you have already been doing, together with Caro, so that we can be able to see whether there are commonalities in the methodologies for purposes of validation and that type of work. Thank you.
I would like to use this question not to only ask Kattiline to answer, but also the other panelists. Thanks for this great question, because this opens now a debate among the panelists. Who wants to start?
Yeah, no, I also thought it would be nice if my colleagues here answer, because for these higher level, because you mentioned the 5.2 million that Kenya committed to restore, on those high level, so my study is probably not going to be the best model for you. I mean, the best financial model to calculate that. You could use it, but there have been other people developing, you know, more holistic models where you can put in these that are more generic, so to say. What we do is really, once you have decided on your 5.2 million, what you want to break it down into. Like, let's say, you know, okay, on the secondary forest land, you know, because part of your 5.2 million is going to be secondary forest. Other parts is going to be, you know, degraded pasture land or whatever. But in your secondary forest, for example, you could decide, okay, my priority there is to convert it into agroforestry, specific systems. And you know already which are best. You have identified maybe coffee and something else. Then our model, the unique model, can help you do that very specific, from secondary forest to agroforestry. But on a national level, what can you do?
On a national level?
Very loud and clear, please.
Right. On a national level, ELD has been working in Kenya since this summer as part of an EU-funded project. There's a little description on the project out there. And actually, the ministry asked us to focus on the water towers there. This is the linkage between land and water here in Kenya, which seems to be crucial. So despite the strong rains you've been experiencing in summer, there is still a shortage of shortage of water in the city areas, in some areas here as well. So the conservation and sustainable management of the water towers, there seems to be an issue there. And ELD is working on that level, so maybe a step or a level beyond or above what UNIque does there on the national level, and we are providing scenarios in this context as well there. And this is something which we will be developing in the course of the next year.
Thanks for that question, and thanks for all the interventions. I mean, I think I have two things to offer there. One is, when we started the policy assessment and we brought a big consultation group in Kenya, the main aim of focus was always, as Marc has already noticed, water catchment areas. And Mau was one of the options. So actually, I think Marc, ELD and Teeb need to work more in Teeb, Kenya. So that's one of the things that I hope we'll be able to focus on. And then the second question is, the way we do the modeling, the biophysical modeling, I wouldn't want to say there is already an existing model. I think it's better for us to, in a participatory way, develop the model together. So what kind of things do you envision will influence the retroactive loops or in the coming 10, 50, 100 years, which I hope is what we are aiming for when it comes to economic sustainability from those 5.2 million hectares of forest. So yeah, I think it would be really good to discuss further, if that would help.
We have now already entered what in the invitation is called the open discussion, and we have proposed a guiding question, a lead question. Can economic arguments facilitate responsible investments in sustainable land management and increase the adoption rate by land users? This is what we exactly have started to discuss. Does an economic analysis, cost and benefit analysis, really support all the big goals, 20 million hectares by 2020, 30 million hectares by 2030, AFR 100, 5.1 million hectares in Kenya alone? Can the economic model support it? And I would like to go beyond. What does this mean for a theory of change? Putting figures on a screen is nice and informative, but this is not a theory of change. What has to happen that the knowledge created by these three great guys can be translated into policies and can change the everyday life of farmers? Because in the end, this analysis has not been done for economic reasons only. It has to contribute to improve livelihoods and to support a transformation towards sustainability. So the three of you, what is the next step we have to take so that the great analysis can be really translated into action on the ground? And you all are doing country work. So don't say it's too early to raise this question. Even if you don't have 100% of an answer, what are the next immediate steps you think have to be done in order to achieve all the big promises we have heard yesterday in the opening plenary? And we will hear again in the closing plenary.
I just have maybe a very small contribution to how we could do that. But synergies, I think we are all working in Kenya. So I know sometimes time and funds get lost on meetings and just talking and doing plans, and then those plans sometimes never get implemented, so we call them roadmaps. And so I think it would be really good, I mean, just hearing what the water tower priority from the Kenya Forestry Service, and hearing that ELD is already working on it, linking to the forestry models that can be done. I think maybe in a more strategic way, I think it would be really good for us to collaborate further. And so sometimes we bring a lot of consultation, but yeah, let's make it concrete. If anybody has the great idea on how to do that, it would be good.
Marc?
Agreed, and please don't feel sidelined because we just had this conversation with the ministry in July, so it's just brand new. Yeah, we had this conversation with the ministry, which indicates that we are setting up national processes and which are tailored to the needs of the national decision makers there. This is, I think, crucial there, that we do this in close cooperation with our partners on the ground there. So stakeholder involvement there is key, and this is also why we are not bringing only hardcore economists to our projects, but also people who facilitate the policy dialogue. I'm looking at SEI, for example, or other partners here from our side. Yeah, so it's important to have these stakeholders on the ground. Plus, maybe one addition, we can help with some expertise from people who've been doing this before, international experts, but this expertise needs to be built up on the ground, needs to be widened, needs to be broadened for people, experts in this national context there, meaning that we work with universities, researchers on all levels as future decision makers there on the ground.
Okay, maybe coming from, so at different levels, I think people can start doing things in parallel immediately. We don't have to wait for anything. A farmer is doing a cost-benefit analysis every day. So I think it's not a question of whether it's important or not. It's happening all the time. All of us are doing it every day. The farmers I speak to, they would be happy to invest in sustainable measures if they have the knowledge. So one thing is to get the knowledge out, things that organizations like VI Agroforestry are doing, you know, all the extension agencies. If you're in a position, in a decision-making power position, you can ensure funding for these types of organizations. The other thing that farmers need is finance to be able to cover the upfront investment costs of, let's say, buying a bag of a little bit more expensive fertilizer or planting a few trees or implementing some other measure that they can't do with their own cash. So if, again, if you are in a decision-making power position, you can argue for these kinds of financial incentives programs if you're in the government. And you can also, if you're a decision maker, introduce this kind of economic thinking, these types of bringing externalities into decision making. You can all start doing it. We know, I mean, even if you don't have the concrete numbers, all of us have this gut feeling that, yeah, the benefits are there. Don't wait for the next study. Just do your own little calculation, maybe based on your own farm that I'm sure you have somewhere, and use those arguments.
Now we have two more people asking for the floor. I would like to intervene briefly as a moderator because Kattiline, you twice referred to yields per hectare as cost benefit. I do not agree with it. And I would like to tell you why. I'm coming from Germany, 8 hours flight to the north. We have very intensive agriculture. And if you use yields per hectare as a cost-benefit analysis for sustainable agriculture, you will fail. Let me tell you why. We have intensive farming for producing livestock. Germany is importing soybeans from Brazil. We have intensive production of feed, and we are exporting pig meat to China. Good business, very efficient. But there are negative externalities. We have a growing problem with our drinking water because the manure and the fertilizers over the time go into the drinking water. Our drinking water will be a lot more expensive because of the pollution caused by unsustainable agriculture. So looking at yields per hectare only might be too narrow. That's the reason why we did this complex study of Teeb.
I totally agree. That's why it was just one of the benefits I mentioned.
But in traditional agricultural science, everybody says the system is very complex. Let's do an analysis. And in the end, they all talk about yields per hectare. And they forget employment. They forget negative and positive externalities. So no farmer will get paid if he or she is a steward of biodiversity, which is absolutely important for our future. And therefore, yes, I 100% subscribe to your example that using organic fertilizers to increase production here in Kenya is a positive example, but you cannot use it in a general way. You are coming into a dead-end road if you're looking only at yields per hectare. The most efficient systems in the world have very high negative externalities, and we will pay a very high price for it. So that's the reason why the complex studies you have done, Marc has done, and Monica has done, they have a value. Now I have two more people asking for the floor. Could someone bring the microphone over to this gentleman over there? Where's the microphone? Oh, someone is keeping the microphone for further interventions. Here we have two more interventions than the table behind, one more, and then number 4. Please keep it brief and introduce yourself.
Yeah, Wasim Alai from the NGO called Dawn Foundation from India. This session, the economics definitely proves that it should be followed by as a self-sustainable with the bankers, with a self. I think what next, the question you really posed. The next is how this is getting translated by the impact of, say, about 200 million people, if the economics proves right. That should be an integral part of the study. And again, you should really bring bankers into this because they are the people who are really going to finance this and on pricing. And secondly, if it is really proven the big farmers or middle farmers, they don't need bank finances, they will do on its own. So this study is has to have an impact on the farmer's practice. Otherwise, it will stop here. I think I've seen many studies which stops there. My second point, just brief.
But really brief, please.
Yeah, brief. These kind of studies are long-term oriented. It's not a project. Many times project orientation has a very short life period, and it has its own problem. Thank you.
My name is Zachary Makanya. I'm the country coordinator for Pelham Kenya. Pelham is a network of NGOs. In Kenya, around we have 55 members. We include VI, Agroforestry, Manhouse Agriculture Center. Now, we are very proud of what our members are doing because Pelham stands for Participatory Ecological Land Use Management. So these things we are talking about here, we have been doing them for the last 25 years. Now, to answer your question, I think one area that needs to be talked of is about to increase collaboration between networks. Because there are many networks which have been formed around ecosystems about biodiversity, but they are working on their own. But we are very happy because next week, on Thursday, a day like today, GIZ and Ambero, there's an initiative supported by GIZ, Ambero, we are meeting. They are calling all the networks together so that we can say, what are you doing? Because I think the first step of collaboration is to understand what all the networks are doing, and then what you can also say is, what can we do together? So to me, that is very, very important. The other thing I think is also good because...
The other second and last thing, please.
Yes. It is also going to document best practices, what is working. Sometimes people go to all areas of doing research, but it's good also to capture what has been working and then share it around so that people can adapt, can document, can domesticate what is working. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please hand the microphone over to the next table. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Ruth Meinzendick from IFPRI, and I wanted to take up your question about why do these numbers matter and to whom. And one of the important, you've already mentioned to the farmers, but one of the important crucial things there is how is labor valued? If we're just assuming, like so many people do, that the labor is free or calculating, and you don't look at the specific shortages, if, for example, men are migrating and you don't have male labor to do certain tasks, that's going to skew the investment, and you won't get the returns you're expecting. But then the other part of it is we're working with an NGO in India that is doing Foundation for Ecological Security that's doing a lot of land restoration work. They want evidence on how the ecosystem services are valued, because a lot of what's being done is actually needs to be done on the commons that produces values for private land. We're focusing a lot on the private land, but if we don't look at what happens on the commons, we lose the pollinator services. We lose the water functions. You know, these kinds of services too. So planting trees on your private land is not sufficient for landscape level restoration. And so I think that who is going to valorize what gets done on this other land is why some of these other numbers are important. Thanks.
So thanks a lot, Marc. This is your task to organize the next meeting, taking the comments into account. I 100% agree with you. So please note it down, and you will all receive an invitation. The next person is here.
Good morning. My name is Kimani Kibe. I just wanted to repeat what he said. I think the onus is on the UN to bring together all these voices that are working in restoration. Secondly, I think we all agree, including the farmers on the ground, government agencies, and all the other stakeholders, that we need to restore our lands. So we to do is ask ourselves, then what is the big issue? Why are we not doing it? Because everyone agrees that the benefits are much, much more than the costs. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. I would like now to go back to the three panelists. Everybody has 1 minute for a last comment and remark. Let's start with the last one of the presenters.
Thanks. Thanks for these very interesting comments. I agree with all of them. Yeah, as you know, the risk always of giving a specific example is that a lot of, detail or other issues get lost. And if you talk in generic terms, it's always easier to include all these multiple ecosystem and social benefits. I agree that it's important. And so the example that I gave was a very specific one, and I agree that it's not only about yield. As I said, it's about many other benefits, including the social and environmental ones. So I think we all know the arguments. I don't want to preach to the converted. Yeah, let's go out there and do it.
Monica?
Thank you all for those questions. I think, like you've just mentioned, sometimes in these forums, we all know what we want. We all know that the benefits outweigh the costs of, like, if we do the proper land management practices, but maybe we are preaching to the choir a little bit. So we all tend to agree on the conclusions that we get to. So I suppose breaking the silos, as was mentioned previously, how are we going to bring business sector and policymakers? Sometimes environment and agriculture need to make the case to planning and finance, and they need to say, just give us more funds. So if we can help, if we can support that discussion, if we can provide environment and agriculture with credible scientific information to turn the science into policy, the policy into action, that would be, I think, a good way forward. And of course, I mean, I think UN is made by all the member states, and we do what the member states tell us to do. But I think we can't overestimate what our impact is. So we definitely need to count on those civil society organizations and business sectors and other bilaterals. Thank you.
So joining hands in this, I agree that we should work to have impacts on all levels, right? From farmer level to the multinational level there. And when Kattiline brought up this example from the farm level there, I agree that farm production can be a very good way of telling a story that it's worth managing your land sustainably there. Not only focusing, of course, on the production, on the yields there, but going in a more comprehensive way forward. And this is why we choose also for this session here, this focus on food, maybe on land, for land management there, because it tells a very good story. Many people can relate to the need for food security there. And along with Teeb for food and agriculture, our work here, what our friends from UNIQ have done there, I think this provides a comprehensive approach for that economic valuation in the context of land management can be a helpful facilitating way forward.
Thanks a lot. We are coming to the end of this session. I have only two very brief tasks. The first is to try to summarize in takeaway messages what is, from my personal perspective, the essence of this debate. I would like to do it in highlighting 4 issues. First, this session has made very clear that economics can be used as a language to reach out to decision makers on different levels, linking stakeholders from different sectors and informing about the hidden externalities, both positive and negative. Let's not forget, there are very often positive externalities where farmers don't get paid for. So economics can make it visible and they can provide a framework. The second message is, this is a precondition to really invest in sustainable management of ecosystems. As long as it is free to pollute the environment or to emit CO2 into the atmosphere, we will not change our development pathways towards sustainability. So the economics are a precondition. However, let's not talk about the economics alone. We have to always talk about the people. We have to think about safeguards. Not everything what is economically viable is good for indigenous people in the forest, for example. And therefore, in the end, it's all about people. This was my second message. And my third message is economics is not about attaching a price tag to nature and its services. We want to make the values visible. Some you can monetize, others you cannot or you should not monetize. Cultural heritage, for example, cannot be monetized, but it has a value. And the economics are not only talking about prices, they are talking about values. That's my takeaway message number 3. And the takeaway message number 4, maybe the most difficult is, how can we really ensure that a country like Kenya will not be confronted with several approaches, with many projects, with different ways to value it, but how can we work together in a network? Thank you for raising this. If every small-scale project comes to Kenya and says, I have the solution, but it's different than the solution provided by Marc, different by Kattiline, and different by Monica, this is not going to fly. So the challenge of the future is to bring these initiatives together, to agree on a common basis in order to support transformation, and not only to be scientifically very important, but to change issues on the ground. So these are my 4 takeaway messages, and my task number 2 as a moderator is to thank the 3 panelists and you for really very interesting and great session. You stayed longer than expected because we are now 20 minutes over time, and therefore I would like to thank you for staying here for your presentations. I would like to thank the 3 panelists, and we have to continue, Marc.
And thank you, Alex, for keeping it all together. Thank you all for coming this morning, and I think we'll be around for another couple of minutes if you have any questions or so.